It's November 1956, and the most ironic event in modern church history is about to take place. Dallas, Texas. A mile from the Methodist Hospital, a brand new dark green convertible is swerving around corners and racing over potholes. Inside, a portly 6'3" reverend is gasping for breath, clawing the air for oxygen. His wife floors the gas pedal, speeding through a red light as they race death to the hospital. Just weeks earlier, this larger-than-life megapastor had been traveling the country and preaching to packed-out arenas. Now, the 38-year-old looks like a phantom on the cusp of death. Lips turning blue, he desperately clings to life as their brand new luxury sports car screeches to a halt outside the ER. His wife's screams for help are the last thing that he hears before everything fades to black. The doctors rush to action. Placing him on oxygen, they perform a tracheotomy to help him breathe. Over the next few weeks, he drifts in and out of consciousness as they fight to save his feeble life. Meanwhile, his congregation holds round-the-clock prayer meetings, begging God to heal their spiritual leader. What would happen next would shock the nation in one of the most twisted turns of fate that the world has ever seen. But first, there's a little something that you need to know about this man of the cloth. He wasn't just any old pastor. This was the Reverend Jack Coe, one of the most famous faith healers in the world, and hands down the most controversial. But now, here he was in the hospital at just 38 years old, in desperate need of his own miracle. But the irony of Jack Coe's story goes so much deeper. And until now, it's been all but forgotten outside of a few evangelical circles.
Jack Coe.
Where the original story has been whitewashed beyond recognition.
Oral Roberts and Kenneth Hagin made a great statement about the man that we're about to study. They said of all the ministers they've known throughout their ministry life, Jack Coe was the man that had the gift of faith stronger than anybody else had ever seen or heard of.
For the first time in history, you're about to hear the truth about Jack Coe told in its entirety.
I just hit the ones Jesus tells me to.
January 1956. Modern medicine is in its infancy. The first proper clinical trials have only recently been published, and global life expectancy is still just a mere 49 years. And you, my unfortunate friend, are a Miami tomato farmer. A recent spine and neck injury has almost paralyzed you, and now you're rocking a sexy new neck brace. Doctors have told you that you'll likely recover, but to refrain from any physical activity for the next 6 months while it all heals. It could be worse. You could have come down with a case of cancer.
Cancer in the butthole!
But even still, it's planting season. You have a wife and 6 small children to feed, and you can't afford to take a half a year off.
God has blessed us so much, I can't afford to feed you anymore.
Sipping your black morning coffee, your eyes light up as you flip open the Miami Herald and see a large ad for a traveling faith healer promising to instantly cure your afflictions. Is this God's answer to your prayers of desperation, or just a traveling fraud?
God sent me out and gave me power over sickness, over disease, over the works of the devil.
Should you gamble on the healer and, in faith, remove your neck brace, you'll either be instantly healed or risk permanent damage to your already injured neck and spine.
Sister back there, smile, will you? Thank you.
Faith healers and prayers for the miraculous are nothing new and aren't exclusive to Christianity by any means. But while there were some big-name faith healers like Francis Schlatter in the 1890s, the widespread embrace of the Pentecostal movement, with mega pastors packing out arenas, filling the airwaves, and greedily raking in fortunes while claiming to heal the desperately ill with nothing but prayer, that didn't really take off until post-World War II Cold War America. And among the early pioneers of this movement, one man took things to a whole new level.
And now we present a man of great faith, the Reverend Jack Coe, who has preached in the world's largest tents and auditoriums.
These weren't your typical stale church meetings. Coe was a showman. Everything had to be big.
Go big or go home.
When he heard that the traveling evangelist Oral Roberts had the world's largest tent, Coe went and measured it, and then went and ordered one a few feet bigger just so that he could claim the top spot, a fact that he never hesitated to advertise. His meetings were electric. He claimed to be filled with the Spirit of God itself, preaching fiery sermons containing words of prophecy, enticing his congregation with divine insights during the terrifying uncertainty of the Cold War. And for the hopelessly sick and disabled, the pastor promised healing for everything from arthritis to cancer.
You'll see the lame walk and the blind see. You'll see cancers leave people's bodies. All you have to do is put a little bit of faith in a great big God.
Crutches left behind by the healed lined the interior of his tent, and he boasted in newspaper ads of ambulances leaving his meetings empty. His message raced across America, broadcast on 68 radio stations and over 100 TV stations, and it reached over 250,000 subscribers to his monthly magazine, which he filled with the testimonies of those he allegedly healed. So it's no surprise that when this itinerant minister would show up in a city, people like you, my unfortunate tomato farmer, would flock from miles around to hear him preach, and hopefully receive a miracle of your own. Coe didn't just offer people prayer. He also discouraged them from seeing a doctor. He regularly painted doctors as tools of the devil, pressuring his followers to opt for faith healing instead, and going so far as to say that doctors and hospitals were for sinners and unbelievers, not Christians. After declaring someone healed, Coe would encourage them to throw away their crutches and medicine.
You have a brace on your back, support of any kind? Yeah. Go back in the women's room, take the support off and throw it away. You never need it again.
He'd remove people's neck braces, jolt people around who had bad backs and spinal injuries, and literally throw people out of their wheelchairs.
There's like 23 people in wheelchairs, and he grabbed them by the collar of their clothes or by their dress and just picked them up and threw them out of the wheelchairs and said, walk. All but about 6 walked, and this is the personality of Jack Coe. Turned back and said, well, you didn't walk because you didn't have any faith, and stormed off and did something else.
Which is kind of terrifying coming from a man who's 90% pants. But not to you, my believing tomato-growing friend. To you, this was God's servant, here to reward your faith and heal your injuries. February 1956. With all of this hype, when Pastor Coe showed up for his 5-week-long healing revival in Miami, Florida, the devoutly religious Adon Taft, a reporter from the Miami Herald, couldn't pass up the opportunity to attend one of these meetings himself and investigate Coe's claims. And in the process, Taft discovered just a little bit of fishiness. First, he noticed that Coe mostly attempted to heal ailments that couldn't be easily verified by the audience. Things like internal cancers, arthritis, and stomach ulcers.
In the name of Jesus, heal his sinus, his heart, and every part of this body, Lord, for Jesus' sake. Amen. Go praise him for it. Hallelujah.
And of the 6 people that Coe claimed to have cured, who Taft later was able to follow up with, 4 of them had definitively not been cured of their afflictions. One man who Coe allegedly cured of partial deafness seemed to show some, but not total improvement, at least according to his believing wife's subjective opinion.
Whoa, it's a miracle!
And when the Herald attempted to follow up with the 6th man, who claimed to have been healed of stroke-induced partial paralysis, they found that the address he gave them was an empty lot, which is kind of suspicious. And those in attendance who were obviously ill, including 2 wheelchair-bound people with severe cases of polio, well, they left exactly as they'd come. Taft published his findings, and the expose article enraged Coe. In retaliation, at his next revival service, he pressured people to sign forms as they left, claiming that they'd been healed. He then submitted 49 of these signed statements himself to the Miami Herald, although none of them were medically verified. And to add to the spectacle, the pastor threatened to spam the Herald with 50 more signed statements per day for the rest of his 5-week Miami tent revival. Because, you see, the Herald didn't just call Coe's healings into question. Taft also explored the financial side of his operations and found that Coe possessed a mastery for fundraising and had turned his revivals into a giant money-making business, easily raking in over $2,500 a night from offering plate donations alone. But Thomas, you might be saying, $2,500 a night isn't that much running a massive operation like this. But that's 1956 dollars. When you adjust for inflation, that would be closer to about $26,000 a night in today's money. And this was chump change for Coe, who bragged that he'd be willing to give away all those profits to whoever paid his expenses for the revival.
I had a visitor today wanting to know how much money we took in. Told me her boss was interested in paying all the expenses of this meeting and taking everything that was left over. And I sure hope he makes up his mind to do that.
Because he knew that the real money lay in growing his magazine subscription base. At each new revival, 5,000 to 6,000 new paid subscribers would sign up to his monthly magazine. And then he would use the magazine to sell his books and beg for more donations, claiming that the money was desperately needed to feed the poor, starving orphans that he was selflessly taking care of at the children's home that he'd founded. And it worked. The money came flooding in. At its peak, Coe's ministry would receive 8,000 to 10,000 letters a day, about half of them stuffed with cash, all of which was tax exempt. The ministry funded his travel, putting him up in fancy hotels, and covered things like expensive restaurant dinners with colleagues. And while Coe raked in a fat salary and was furnished with a mansion and a brand new car, his orphans scraped by in suboptimal conditions and were denied basic medical care. It was so bad that after neighbors submitted complaints to the Dallas authorities, Coe had to relocate the children's home to a rural rural lot in Waxahachie, Texas, away from the public scrutiny and accountability. With the spotlight now on him, Pastor Coe fired back, accusing Taft of lying in his article, and he even encouraged his followers to cancel their subscription to the Miami Herald. On a side note, can we all agree to stop pretending like outraged Christians aren't the original cancel culture in this country? But despite Coe's criticism of the Herald, the 6 people reported on weren't the only ones the Reverend Coe claimed to have healed, whose healings later were exposed as fake. At the very same revival in Miami, a desperate mother brought her 3-year-old son George Clark to the minister to be healed of polio. Coe laid his hands on the tiny crippled child and prayed, "Jesus, heal this boy," before declaring him healed and instructing him to remove his leg braces and hobble across the stage. But the boy's legs gave out, he crumpled to the ground, and he had to be carried home. But Coe doubled down, declaring that God had just begun to work his glorious act of healing in the boy.
God's going to let him walk tonight, but his body isn't going to be perfect, but it's going to begin to grow. It's going to begin to straighten out. Do you believe me?
He instructed the mother to throw away his leg braces and have him walk a little bit every day in an act of faith.
Just like a baby learning how to walk. Take a step. That's it. Take another one, son. Take another one, baby. Come on.
For the next several days, the mother obeyed the man of God's instructions, but George's legs began to swell. They puffed up and his ankles turned sideways, resulting in $7,500 in medical expenses, and that's $1956. Little George's doctor even stated that had he continued to walk without his braces, as Coe had commanded, permanent damage would certainly have resulted. Now, after this incident, Coe was arrested and charged with practicing medicine without a license, but he had money and connections. So immediately after posting bail, Coe continued his healing revival meetings where he claimed that his arrest was the work of the devil. In his sermons, he compared himself to Jesus and Elisha.
Jesus was practicing healing without a license. That guy could be put in jail for practicing medicine without a license.
Playing the persecution card, he portrayed his upcoming trial as a constitutional issue, telling his followers that their freedom of religion itself was under attack.
If you oppose divine healing, you don't oppose Jack Coe. You oppose the work of the living God.
And appealing to them to protest his upcoming trial at the courthouse. That first night alone after his arrest, he raised over $6,000 in donations from his outraged supporters by telling them that this fight was so important that if they didn't have the money to give to him, they should borrow it. He also begged for support in his magazine, The Herald of Healing, and through his radio broadcasts, he even urged his supporters to protest his arrest to the governor of Florida, Leroy Collins. Imagine having the audacity to severely and almost permanently injure a 3-year-old crippled boy who's known nothing but pain and polio his entire life, to lie to the child and his mother, to give him false hope, and then turn around and act like you're the victim when you're finally held accountable for your actions. But it worked. Other faith healers around the US flocked to his defense and twisted the narrative in every mass media outlet at their disposal. They descended on Miami, and at least 14 other evangelists testified at Coe's trial in his defense, while a mob of nearly 1,000 people picketed outside the courthouse for his release. During the trial, Coe was accused of hiring actors to pretend that they were healed, something which Adon Taft's reporting in the Miami Herald had also alluded to with the case of the man who gave an address of an empty lot. But the prosecution lacked the smoking gun necessary to prove that claim, and eventually, pressured by such overwhelming protest, the judge dismissed the case on a religious loophole, Florida's legal exemption for divine healing. And the whole time, Coe was raking in money by painting himself as a hero of religious liberty. And that is exactly how evangelicals will continue to portray Jack Coe to this day.
I mean, he set records. The largest tent ministry.
It impacted our nation in a big way.
He didn't just go and lay hands on somebody, he smacked.
So he wasn't sitting in a chair.
Yeah, he would rip a goiter off a lady's neck. They were always healed. In fact, he healed so many that he was put in jail.
Wouldn't it be great to have him here?
Boy, it'd be great to hear what he had to say.
And on that note, I'm off to go toast or teabag a bathtub because I don't really want to share a planet with these monsters anymore. No one told me you had to plug it in first. Well, might as well finish the video. Fortunately, even though Jack Coe won his case, there was a silver lining to the Miami scandal. It shined a floodlight on his controversial actions. Even numerous church networks by this point were denouncing him, accusing the preacher of religious racketeering. But let's give Coe the benefit of the doubt. Just because the healings that we've looked at so far weren't genuine, that doesn't mean that none of his were. Sure, you shouldn't embrace extraordinary claims without evidence, but scientific skepticism does not equal cynicism or contrarianism. It's the predisposition towards doubt until sufficient evidence is provided. And in this spirit of healthy scientific skepticism, several Church of Christ pastors in Florida gave Coe the chance to prove himself, offering him a $2,500 prize. It's about $26,000 in today's money, if he could verifiably cure anyone with an organic disease under medical supervision. Joseph Lewis, president of the Freethinkers of America, sweetened the deal, offering to donate $10,000 in Coe's name to any hospital of the preacher's choice and to nominate Coe for a Nobel Prize if he could prove that he had cured a single child of polio. Random people even started mailing Coe's magazine with financial offers if he could prove himself, and his answer would be rather revealing. Coe retorted that God doesn't heal in order to convince skeptics and doubters. How convenient. But the preacher knew that he didn't need to prove himself. His followers had already bought his shtick, hook, line, and hell, they gobbled the entire fishing rod whole. So instead, Coe just goaded the Herald in an ad in their own magazine, stating that he was still holding meetings, and he bragged that he had the world's biggest tent.
He's got a huge tent!
While the trial was ongoing, Coe attempted to obtain a land permit for an upcoming Tampa revival, but both the city and county denied his application. He attempted to covertly bypass their ban on him by submitting a new application under a different pastor's name, but he advertised it in the freaking newspaper. So, of course, that permit got revoked, and it garnered him even more negative press coverage. Eventually, even his own denomination, the Assemblies of God, which had ordained him, began to see him as problematic, and they revoked his membership. In all honesty, it was probably because of those armpit-high pants. Unfazed, he continued his healing revivals and even expanded into the world of televangelism. But his aspirations there would be short-lived, because just 9 short months after his 1956 trial, Jack Coe became deathly ill of, you guessed it, polio. If only he knew a way to heal that. Perhaps miraculously. Maybe through faith or divine healing even?
My God can heal anything. He will heal anything. He's here tonight to heal you if you'll only put your faith and trust in him.
But in the most telling act imaginable, rather than praying away his polio, Jack turned to those evil doctors he'd warned everyone about to save his pathetic life. And the next several weeks would prove critical. His doctors were initially able to stabilize him, but they found that by delaying going to the hospital, Coe had suffered brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. Unfazed by the reports, his sister stated with confidence that she believed God would heal him and he'd fully recover, as did his wife and his friend, Reverend J.E. Wilson, who both wrote exactly that in Coe's magazine, before capitalizing on the opportunity to beg his followers for even more money, because who's going to take care of those poor orphans? I just want to point out at this point that earlier that year, the trial in Miami had revealed that Coe's tax-exempt ministry had acquired between $800,000 and $900,000 worth of assets in just 5 years. And again, those are 1956 dollars, so multiply that number by at least 10. And that's just what Coe was willing to disclose, like property values. We'll never know just how wealthy he got off of the suffering of others, since most of his funding came flooding in the form of untraceable cash donations. And his ministry's board lacked any kind of transparency or oversight because it consisted solely of him, his wife, and 2 other close family members. But oh, you wouldn't want the poor orphans to go hungry now, would you?
Here in my garage, just bought this new Lamborghini here. But you know what I like a lot more than materialistic things?
Orphan children.
During his hospital stay, Coe received thousands of thoughts and prayers, but oddly enough, none of them seemed to work. And Coe died December 16th, 1956, at just 38 years old, completely shocking his followers, friends, and family.
It was always a puzzle to me why he got sick and couldn't overcome it.
And this moment, right here, should have been the end of the entire faith healing movement. But refusing to let such a lucrative industry fade out from under them, other self-proclaimed faith healers weaseled up a plethora of excuses for his death. Some claimed that they would have healed him, but they weren't allowed to visit because he was quarantined in the hospital. Which is hilarious given that they would regularly promise their listeners that God could heal them via prayers through the radio. And it kind of makes you wonder why all these Christians bother to send thoughts and prayers if God is limited by proximity or blocked by hospital quarantines.
I believe you in television land there. When I begin this healing line, I believe if you'll pray with me, I believe God will come into that living room where you're bound. He'll walk in and lay his hand upon you. That old cancer will go. That old tumor will disappear. For he's the same compassionate Jesus, and he's right there, ready to heal you.
Voice of Healing magazine editor Gordon Lindsay claimed that Coe's death was simply the fulfillment of a vague anonymous prophecy made about him while he was on his deathbed. And you remember the televangelist Oral Roberts? You know, the one who did have the biggest tent before Coe went and one-upped him? He claimed that Jack's death was God's punishment for, among other things, being fat.
Go bigger, go bigger.
Finally, the faith healer O.L. Jaggers went so far as to scold Coe's wife for not letting him raise Jack Coe from the freaking dead. He was apparently denied the opportunity because Coe's wife believed that it was simply God's timing to take Coe and resurrection just wasn't God's will. Over the years, as faith healing and televangelism have grown into a multi-billion-dollar business, evangelicals have tried to whitewash Jack Coe as a hero of the faith, a poor, persecuted champion of religious liberty. They like to point out that he was a World War II veteran, a war hero. But the fact that he was regularly sent to the psych ward and was eventually discharged from the military for being a religious fanatic, they paint that as just religious persecution.
You can give your heart to Jesus, but your ass belongs to the car.
They'll paint him as a progressive for the time when it came to race, pointing out how he would allow both white and black worshippers to attend his giant revival meetings. And while it's true that he wouldn't discriminate when it came to who he took tithe money from, they don't like to mention that he actively preached against interracial marriage. He printed racist jokes about segregated buses in his magazine, or the fact that his ushers literally had police escort black congregants out of his meetings for sitting in the white section, all during Coe's sermon on brotherly love. And they definitely won't bring up the fact that he boasted that his missionaries were going to convert those who he publicly referred to as godless, hopeless heathens, little naked savages, and native killers living in darkness. Evangelicals will boast about Coe lifting people out of wheelchairs and how ambulances would arrive full to his meetings and go home empty. But they don't mention the fact that the ambulances were privately hired by Coe himself, who advertised free rides to his revivals, but not from them. So of course they left empty. That doesn't mean that any of their occupants actually left healed, just that they were potentially stranded without a ride back. Oh, and by the way, just because someone is in a wheelchair, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't walk at all, or at least hobble a short distance.
In the name of the Lord, 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 in the name of the Lord. Oh, glory to God. Oh, hallelujah.
Especially during a high adrenaline situation like a faith healing prayer line. Which is why at just one of Coe's rallies, while some were able to stand up and hobble around, 40 out of 103 people in wheelchairs weren't even able to stand up without crumpling to the ground, and Coe was entirely unable to heal them. But that wouldn't stop him from lifting people out of wheelchairs, throwing them to the ground and commanding that they get up and walk, quite possibly causing irreparable damage in the process. And finally, evangelicals will talk of Coe's deep relationship with Jesus and his ability to directly hear the voice of God, but they completely bury his hilariously wrong-failed prophecies. One of them was that the Soviet Union was about to drop a hydrogen bomb on New York City to kickstart World War III before invading Israel on horseback with wooden weapons to usher in the end times. And this was all supposed to happen during his generation. And to pile irony on top of irony, Jack Coe was literally about to teach a class on prophecy when he had to be rushed to the hospital, and it was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. And shortly after, he was even supposed to host a Dallas revival that December with 4 other big-name faith healers called the Curing the Incurable rally. But he missed it because he was in the hospital, failing to rally from an incurable disease, which finally took his life on the very last day of that same faith healing rally. You could not pick a worse person to be a hero and a faith healing legendary man of God, and yet in spite of all of this, there are still pastors, televangelists, and other Christians who will proudly follow in Jack Coe's slimy, albeit lucrative footsteps, who treat him like he was some kind of a saint.
He believed God so much that the harder you came after him, the bigger the miracles got and the more faith he had.
And just like Jack Coe, when they get sick, rather than turning to other faith healers, they seek out actual medical doctors, which is why the faith healing evangelist Catherine Coleman went to the hospital for heart surgery where she died in her early 60s. It's why Kenneth Copeland has a pacemaker. And why so many faith healers claim to be able to cure blind eyes while wearing glasses. And it's why Jack Coe's own son, who followed in his footsteps as a faith healer and claimed he'd been miraculously cured of cancer, asked his followers for funding for a kidney transplant shortly before he passed away from an undisclosed cause. In the wake of Coe's death, his wife would continue to tug on the heartstrings of his magazine subscribers and milk them for donations using the Poor Orphans card. But right after the pastor died of polio, it was revealed that he had denied his orphans access to the frickin' polio vaccine. The one thing that could have actually prevented Jack Coe's death had he himself been more pro-medicine. A vaccine which proved so successful that it has eradicated this most horrific virus from all but 2 countries on Earth. And in stark contrast to faith healers who offer false hope and con thousands out of their tithe money, the inventor of the polio vaccine, Dr. Jonas Salk, could have made billions patenting his vaccine, but instead gave it away for free so that human suffering could be prevented. And to squeeze just one final note of irony onto the end of this orchestra of irony, on the very same day that Adon Taft wrote his Miami Herald expose on Jack Coe, a small article appeared right beside it. An article honoring Dr. Jonas Salk, who had just received a gold medal from President Eisenhower for his contributions to humanity, during which Salk stated that he felt that the greatest reward for doing is the opportunity to do more. Coe's name will eventually fade from history. But for now, I wanted to explore the big picture and share the side of his story that evangelicals refuse to tell. Because this is the true foundation of the modern faith healing movement. But by whitewashing Jack Coe and painting him as some sort of great miracle-working holy man, modern-day faith healers are able to warp the narrative and use it to exploit their followers.
Jack Coe, tell me a little bit about him.
Jack Coe was a man who had simple faith in God. And if God told him to do something, he would do it.
But by exposing charlatans and exploring the dark origins of the modern faith healing movement, hopefully we can rob them of this ammunition. And who knows, maybe I'll help safeguard some of you from becoming its future victims. In order to do this right, I've taken months researching Jack Coe and other faith healers. I have pages and pages of references, including over 100 newspaper clippings just for this video. I'll link to all of my sources cited below. My progress has been extremely slow because the last few months I've been grieving a recent breakup from a 3.5-year relationship, and I've been battling depression surrounding that. I'm starting to recover and get my spark back, but because long, well-researched videos like this take longer to make, and YouTube AdSense favors more frequent uploads, and because ad rates have plummeted recently, my income has kind of taken a massive hit, which has also added to the weight of the depression, and definitely made therapy unaffordable at the moment. But I'm doing what I can. To date, I've made over 175 high-quality videos on my channel, which will always be free, and I have no plans to stop anytime soon. It's only been because of support from viewers like you that I've been able to put the level of time and energy that's required into my videos. So if my content has brought value to your life, has helped you in any way, or if you just appreciate that someone is dedicating their life to exposing pseudoscience, con artists, and charlatans while promoting healthy scientific skepticism and critical thinking, would you consider supporting my work? It's super easy. You can do so with either a per video pledge on Patreon or with a one-time donation on PayPal or Venmo. I'll put links to all that below. If you click the PayPal link, you can even use like credit cards for donations and stuff. Thank you so much to everyone who has supported me up until now. Y'all are genuinely the best that I could possibly ask for. And if you can't make a donation for whatever reason, or you're just new to the channel, that's okay. But would you consider joining me on my journey by subscribing for future content and smashing the heck out of that like button on any video that you enjoy? Because it helps a lot, and personally, I can't wait to share my next few videos with you. Thank you so much, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid. Oh, and I'll give Jack the last word on this one. I'm sure he's got something very pertinent to say.
You old sisters running around with a deck of cards in your hands trying to break into society. So no, I'm breaking into society. You make me sick. Your children run the streets like a bunch of hoodlums. Your husbands go without cooked meals while you go off and sit at a bridge party all day.
or play penny ante poker all day. You make me sick.